of the Prisoner of Azkaban by J.K. Rowling. Chapter 8 Flight of the Fat Lady. No time at all, defense against the dark arts had become most people's favorite class. Only Draco Malfoy and his gang of Slytherins had anything bad to say about Professor Lupin. Look at the stat of his robes, Malfoy would say in a loud whisper as Professor Lupin paused. The dress is like all wholesome. But no one else cared that Professor Lupin's robes were patched and fake. The next few lessons were just as interesting as the first. After Boggarts, they started rat caps, nasty little goblin-like creatures that alert whenever he had been bloodshed, in the dungeons of Castle and the potholes of deserted battlefields, waiting to be bludgeoned. Those who had get lost. From red caps, they moved on to kappas, creepy water dwellers that looked like scaly monkeys with web tanks itching to straddle unwitting waters in their ponds. Harry only wished he was as happy with some sort of his other classes. Worst of all was potions. Snape was in a particularly vindictive mood these days, and no one was in any doubt why. The story of the boggart assuming Snape's shape and the way that Neville had dressed it in his grandmother's clothes had traveled through the school like wildfire. Snape didn't seem to find it funny. His eyes flashed menacingly at the very mention of Professor Lupin's name, and he was belling Neville worse than ever. Harry was also growing to dread the hours he spent in Professor Trelawney's stifling tower room, deciphering lopsides, shapes, and symbols, trying to ignore the way Professor Trelawney's enormous eyes filled with tears every time she looked at him. He couldn't like Professor Trelawney, even though she was treated with respect, bordering on reverse by many of the class. Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown had taken to haunting Professor Trelawney's tower room at lunchtimes, and always returned with annoying, superior looks on their faces, as though they knew things the other didn't. They had also started using hushed voices whenever they spoke to Harry, as though he was on his deathbed. Nobody really liked care of the magical creatures, which after the action-packed first class had become extremely dull. Hagrid seemed to have lost his confidence. They were now spending lesson after lesson learning how to look after flobberworms, which had to be some sort of the most boring creatures in existence. Why would anyone bother looking after them? Said Ron, after yet another hours of poking shredded letters down the flobberworms' slimy throats. At the end of October, however, Harry had something else to occupy him, something too enjoyable and made up for his unsatisfactory classes. The Quidditch season was approaching, and Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor team, called a meeting one Thursday evening to discuss tactics for the new season. There were 7 people in the Quidditch team, 3 chasers, whose job it was to score goals by putting the quaffle, a red football-sized ball, through one of the 50-foot-high hoops at the end of the pitch, 2 beaters who were equipped with heavy bats sprinkled with bludgers, 2 heavy black balls were zoomed around trying to attack the players, a keeper who defended the goalposts, and the seeker, who had the hardest job of all, that of catching the golden snitch, a tiny, winged, walnut-sized ball whose creature ended up the game and earned the seeker's team an extra 150 points. Oliver Wood was a barely 17-year-old, now in his 7th and final year at Hogwarts. There was a quiet sort of desperation in his voice, and he addresses his 6 fellow team members in the chilly changing room at the edge of the darkened Quidditch pitch. This is our last chance, my last chance to win the Quidditch Cup, he told them, striding up and down in front of them. I'll be leaving at the end of this year. I'll never get another shot at it. Gryffindor haven't won for 7 years now. Okay, so we had the worst luck in the world, injuries, then the tournament getting called off last year. Wood swallowed, as though the memory still brought up a lump to his throat. But we also know we've got the best ruddy team in the school, he said, punching a fist onto his other hand. The old man glinted back in his eye. We've got 3 Serpent chasers, Wood pointed at Alicia Spinnet, Angelina Johnson, and Katie Bell. We've got 2 unbeatable beaters. Stop it, Oliver, you're embarrassing us, said Fred and George Weasley together, pretending to blush. And we've got a seeker who has never failed to win us a match. Wood rumbled, glaring at Harry with a kind of furious pride. And me, he added, as an afterthought. We think you're very good too, Oliver, said George. Cracking keeper, said Fred. The point is, Wood went on, resuming his pacing. The Quidditch Cup should have had our name in it these last 2 years, even since Harry joined the team. I've thought the thing was in the back. If we haven't got it, this year's the last chance we'll get to finally see our name on the thing. Wood spoke so dejectedly that even Fred and George looked sympathetic. Oliver, this year's our year, said Fred. We'll do it, Oliver, said Angelina. Definitely, said Harry. Full of determination, the team started training lessons, 3 evenings a week. The weather was getting colder and wetter, the nights darker, but no amount of mud, wind, and rain could tarnish Harry's wonderful vision of finally winning the huge silver Quidditch Cup. Harry returned to the Gryffindor common room one evening after training, cold and stiff, but pleased with the way practice had gone, to find the room buzzing excitedly. What's happened? He asked Ron and Hermione, who were sitting in 2 of the best chairs by the fireside and completing some star charts for astronomy. First Hogsmeade weekend, said Ron, pointing at notice that had appeared on the beddled old noseboard. End of October, Halloween. Excellent, said Fred, who had followed Sir Harry's thought in the portrait hall. I need to visit Zonko's. I'm nearly out of stink pellets. Harry threw himself into a chair beside Ron, his high spirits ebbing away. Hermione seemed to read his mind. Harry, I'm sure you'll be able to go next time, she said. They're bound to catch Black soon. He's been sighted out once already. Duck is not fool enough to try anything in Hogsmeade, said Ron. Ask McGonagall if you can go this time, Harry. The next one might not be for ages. Ron, said Hermione, Harry's supposed to stay in school. He can't be the only 3rd year left behind, said Ron. Ask McGonagall. Go on, Harry. Yeah, I think I will, said Harry, making up his mind. Hermione opened her mouth to argue, but at that moment Crookshanks leaped slightly onto her lap. A large dead spider was dangling from his mouth. Does he have to eat that in front of us? Said Ron, scowling. Clever Crookshanks. Did you catch that all by yourself? Said Hermione. Crookshanks slowly chewed up the spider, his yellow eyes fixed insolently on Ron. Just keep him over there, that's all, said Ron irritably, turning back to his star chart. I've got Scabbers asleep in my bag. Harry yawned. He really wanted to go to bed, but he still had his own star chart to complete. He pulled his back towards him, took out parchment, ink, and quill, and started work. You can copy mine if you'd like, said Ron, labeling his last star with a flourish and showing the charts toward Harry. Hermione, who disapproved of copying, pursed her lips but didn't say anything. Crookshanks was still staring obliquely at Ron, flicking the end of his bushy tail. Then, without warning, he pounced. Ow! Ron roared, seizing his bag as Crookshanks sank 4 sets of claws deeply into it and began chewing furiously. Get off, you stupid animal! Ron tried to pull the bag away from the Crookshanks, but Crookshanks clung on, spitting and slapping. Ron, don't hurt him, squealed Hermione. The whole common room was watching. Ron whirled the bag around, Crookshanks still clinging to it, and Scabbers came flying out of the top. Catch that cat! Ron yelled as Crookshanks freed himself from the remnants of the bag, sprang over the table, and chased after the terrified Scabbers. George Weasley made a lunge for Crookshanks but missed. Scabbers cheeked through the 20 pairs of flags that stood beneath an old chest of doorways. Crookshanks skidded to a halt, crouched low on his bangy legs, and started making furious swipes beneath a chest of drawers with his left paw. Ron and Hermione hurried over. Hermione grabbed Crookshanks around the middle and heaved him away. Ron threw himself onto his stomach and with great difficulty pulled Scabbers out by the tail. Look at him, he said furiously to Hermione, dangling Scabbers in front of her. He's skin and bone. You keep that K away from him. Crookshanks doesn't understand it's wrong, said Hermione, her voice shaking. Oh, let's chase cat. That's Ron. There's something funny about that animal, said Ron, who was trying to persuade a frantically weakening Scabbers back into his pocket. You heard me say the Scabbers was in my bag. Oh, that's rubbish, said Hermione impatiently. Crookshanks could smell him, Ron. How else do you think that cat's got it from Scabbers? Said Ron, ignoring the people around him who were starting to giggle. And Scabbers was here first, and he's ill. Ron marched through the common room and outside the stairs to the boys' dormitories. Ron was still in a bad mood with Hermione next day. He barely talked to her, although her biology, even though Harry and Hermione were working together on the same topic. How's Scabbers? Hermione asked him timidly, as they stripped fat pink pots from the plants and emptied their shining beans into a wooden pail. He's hiding at the bottom of my bed, shaking, said Ron angrily, missing the pail and scattering beans over the greenhouse floor. Careful, Weasley, careful, cried Professor Sprout as the beans burst into bloom before their very eyes. They had Transfiguration next. Harry had resolved to ask Professor McGonagall after the lesson whenever he would go into Hogsmeade with her rest, joined the queue outside the classroom, trying to decide how he was going to argue his case. He was distracted, however, by a disturbance at the front of the line. Lavender Brown seemed to be crying. Parvati had her arm around her and was explaining something to Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas, who were looking very serious. "What's the matter, Lavender?" said Hermione anxiously as she, Harry, and Ron went to join the group. "She got a letter from home this morning," Parvati whispered. "It's her rabbit, Binky. He's been killed by a fox." "Oh," said Hermione. "I'm sorry, Lavender. I should have known," said Lavender tragically. "You know what day is it?" The 16th of October. They think you're dreading it. It will happen on the 16th of October, remember? She was right. The whole class was gathered around Lavender now. Seamus shook his hand seriously. Hermione hesitated. Then she said, You were dreading Binky being killed by a fox? "Well, not necessarily by a fox," said Lavender, looking up at Hermione with steaming eyes. "But I was obviously dreading him dying, wasn't I?" "Oh," said Hermione. She paused again. "Then, was Binky an old rabbit?" "No," sobbed Lavender. "He was only a baby." Parvati tightened her arm around Lavender's shoulders. "But then, why would you dread him dying?" said Hermione. Parvati glared at her. "Well, look at it logically," said Hermione, turned to the rest of the group. "I mean, Binky didn't even die today, did he, Lavender? Lavender just got the news today." Lavender wailed loudly, "and she can't have been dreading it, because it's come as a real shock. Don't mind Hermione, Lavender," said Ron loudly. "She doesn't think other people's pets matter very much." Professor McGonagall opened the classroom door at the moment, which was perhaps lucky. Hermione and Ron were looking daggers at each other. And when they got into class, they seated themselves either side of Harry and didn't talk to each other all lesson. Harry still hadn't decided what he was going to say to Professor McGonagall when the bell rang at the end of the lesson, but it was she who brought up the subject of Hogsmeade first. "One moment, please," she called as the class made to leave. "As you're all in my house, you should hand Hogsmeade permission forms to me before Halloween. No form, no visit in the village, so don't forget." Neville put up his hand. "Please, Professor, I think I've lost..." "Your grandmother said yours to me directly, Longbottom," said Professor McGonagall. "She seemed to think it was safer. Well, that's all. You may leave." "Ask her now," Ron hissed at Harry. "Oh, but..." Hermione began. "Go for it, Harry," said Ron stubbornly. Harry waited for the rest of the class to disappear, that he had nervously to Professor McGonagall's desk. "Yes, Potter?" Harry took a deep breath. "Professor, my aunt and uncle forgot to sign my form," he said. Professor McGonagall looked over at her square spectacles at him, but didn't say anything. "So, do you think it would be all right? I mean, will it be okay if I go to Hogsmeade?" Professor McGonagall looked down and began shuffling papers on her desk. "I'm afraid not, Potter," she said. "You heard what I said. No form, no visit in the village. That's the rule." "But Professor, my aunt and uncle, they're muggles. They don't really understand about Hogwarts forms and stuff," Harry said, while Ron edged him on with vigorous nods. "If you said I could go, but I don't say so," said Professor McGonagall, standing up and piling her papers neatly into the drawer. "The form clearly states that the parent of guardian must give permission." She turned to look at him with an old expression of her face. Was it pity? "I'm sorry, Potter, but that's my final word. You had better hurry or you'd be late for your next lesson." There was nothing to be done. Ron called Professor McGonagall a lot of names that greatly annoyed Hermione. Hermione assumed an all-for-the-best expression that made Ron even angrier. And Harry had to endure everyone in the class talking loudly and happily about what they were going to do first, once they got into Hogsmeade. "There's always the feast," said Ron, as in an effort to cheer Harry up. The Halloween feast in the evening." "Yeah," said Harry gloomily. "Great." The Halloween feast was always good, but it would taste a lot better if he was coming into a day after day in Hogsmeade with everyone else. Nothing anyone said had made me feel any better about him being left behind. Dean Thomas, who was good with a quill, had offered to forge Uncle Version's signature on the form, but as Harry had already told Professor McGonagall he hadn't had it signed, that was no good. Ron half-heartedly suggested the invisibility cloak, but Hermione stamped on that one, reminding Ron that Dumbledore had told him about the Dementors being able to see through them. Percy had whatever possibly the least helpful words of comfort. "They make a fuss about Hogsmeade, but I assure you, Harry, it's not all they're cracked up to be," she said fiercely. "All right, the Swedish shops gather good, but Zonka's joke shop's frankly dangerous. And yes, the shrieking thing always work a visit, but really, Harry, apart from that, you're not missing anything."